Thank you very much, Billy, for your presentation. I think I'm not sure if there's say. I'm going to try to translate this say that you left no rock moved in the subject. There, you touch every thread of subjects that we wanted to address in our symposium, I guess. And I think it's really interesting how there is this shift from this consequential landscape towards this Green New Deal idea of dealing with these subjects. I want to give the opportunity for people in the audience to ask some questions, and perhaps I have some questions from the students of the Taubman University for starting the conversation. And it says, since the LSA tepid 2019 response to the Green New Deal, have ALSA leadership developed their position towards the goal and mandate set forward? If so, do you think their position calls for the kind of professional landscape architecture revolution you've advocated for? This is the first one.
Yeah, this is a great question. So as I understand it right, I think the question is basically asking, like, what has ASLA done or learned in response to some of the GND stuff for the last few years? Well, look, I think it requires to be able to like understand what I'm going to say, maybe, which might sound harsh. You have to understand like why ASLA and AIA exist as organizations, right? They don't exist to be on the leading edge of really anything. They exist to serve their members. They're a professional society. They're always going to be, I think, more towards the median or conservative sort of place that the profession sort of covers than they are on the sort of leading edge of it. That being said, they weren't a hard group to convince to throw some support behind the Green New Deal, but they also weren't a hard group to convince to throw support behind things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, anything that comes from DC that includes jobs and contracts for landscape architects, they're going to be excited about. And in fact, when you look at groups like AIA, they've gotten better about not trumpeting this stuff lately. But, you know, as enthusiastic as they were about the Green New Deal resolution and about the Inflation Reduction Act, they were also that excited to help Trump build his border wall. They were also that excited that AECOM and HOK and a bunch of the other multidisciplinary practices basically float their budgets on prison construction and pipeline construction. So I think for them, like part of how I understand their politics is that they are a jobs program for their members, which I understand. I think it's really frustrating, but I'm also like, I get why they operate that way. One of the nice things about like having the job I have and being not like out in a firm anymore is that I don't have to like worry so much about those things. And often what I spend my time doing with students is trying to help them think through alternative career paths for themselves, if that's not a place that they want to go, right? If they don't want to go work at a firm whose primary objective is like profit accumulation at any cost, at any like expense, where else might they go and make their skills useful? Some wind up in government, some wind up at nonprofits or think tanks, some wind up at, you know, design offices, and some wind up in like places that have nothing to do with the built environment, at least in like obvious ways. So I think like they've been willing and great partners when it has suited their interests, which are jobs for landscape architects. And they're also, I think, understandably like ready to move on to the next thing when it looks like there isn't an immediate contract boom coming from the Green New Deal for their members.
Thank you. Maria, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, thank you, Alejandra. Billy, thank you so much for the talk. As Alejandra just said, you help us connect so many different dots that sometimes feel, you know, challenging to connect and, you know, at times overwhelming. Just for you to know, students have been sharing with us a lot of questions because they are always shy to speak, I don't know why, in public. So we are going to be sharing some of those little by little. But I want to maybe invite some of the students to don't feel like they need to have the smarter question. This is a good opportunity also to share with you some of the things that we have been going through in the through studios. So this semester we took on a trip across the Nevada and California landscapes. This is particularly important because first we are a very international studio section. Out of 13 students, 12 of them are coming from all places, all geographies in the world that you can imagine. And I think something that we all share in common is our urban experiences, but not that much what is that space, that other space that is where most of the production of what we consume in our comfortable urban settings is coming from. And I think this traveling across the geographies that have been traditionally geographies of extraction, but also the geographies where we put things once we don't want them anymore, has been eye-opening, and not only eye-opening in the sense of obviously experience the incredible immensity of the Nevada landscapes or the very contrasting, we went from Reno up to Salton Sea. So our version of California is very, very special. But it was interesting to almost negotiate with different times. When we are talking about how can we contend with this acceleration, this always more is more, and we need more and more and more. And then, we were visiting many of these mining sites that it felt like stuck in the past, right? And it's not only that they're the temporality, they seem to have died at some moment in time, and then we keep them as relics. Is that the way in which these landscapes have become relevant cultural landscapes of some of their residents and how they tell their stories and how they, how they share those with the visitor. And then a completely different reality that you were pointing at. We visited one of the mining sites that has been closed for a long time. It's a gold mine in Goldfield that now is being reprospected because what was waived a few decades ago is now very profitable, right? And here, just to share one of the moments in which I felt like the group felt more in shock. Here we were talking with some of these very young miners. These are folks that are as young as our students that are making some sort of $35 to $50 per hour. They work for a month, they stop for 15 days, and they seem to be also coming from all over the world, very much as our students. And obviously they were sharing with us a very different set of, priorities and needs, and almost like not a way of justifying why they are doing what they are doing, but almost like returning back to us, what do we think our comfort is coming from? And if we want to maintain our lifestyles, what do you think, guys, are we doing here? Making sure that we can keep extracting so that you don't lose your comfort. So it was, one of these moments in which, on one side, we readjusted the imagination that many students have on this notion of mining being something that only old folks and, people who live in this strange rural landscape deal with, because many of the people that were in that prospecting stage were actually coming from all over the world too. They were really, really young. And, this opened a lot of interesting conversations. And obviously, we also saw a lot of what is yet to come in the Lithium Valley in California, and how incredibly challenging is to imagine that more manufacturing can go in what is already an incredibly struggling landscape. And obviously, what are super fun sites that are connected to some of the mines that are not in use anymore, but also, what are the mines that are currently extracting lithium. So just to say that listening to you, making all those connections today was almost a way of revisiting this transect that is very much at the heart of the US, and I would argue is an incredibly space of learning right now. if we dare to contend with, you know, all these different realities that are negotiated there. So just to, you know, share with you some of the thoughts, some of the students are going to be, the questions the students are going to be sharing now are going to be also on your work, because they have been, you know, investigating you and your work. But just to share a little bit in words and not in images, how we have also been trying to make real the, you know, the current existing challenges that this more is more is presenting here in the US. Sorry, I took too long to just share this, but in case the students feel like, you know, this is an opportunity to also share with you some of their thoughts and not just, you know, questions.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I'm happy to like respond to a bunch of, that's such an interesting, I think, like download, but I'm also, I don't want to take up space if folks do have questions. So I'll pause, or I'll just vamp for a second and pretend like I'm not going to talk or respond to Maria. But if you all have questions, like you should do what Mona's doing. You should either like raise your hand. Often when I'm in like class with students, I'll have them keep stack in the chat, right? So you can just do this and write stack and we can call on you. But I think, yeah, Mona, your hand's up. Do you want me to just come to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Billy. I mean, first up, thank you. This was an amazing presentation that, as Maria and Alejandro stated, you know, crossed through all the topics that we are trying to get our head around. You know, my students are working in the last cycle on an assignment. It's called Mining the Sun, and we are really trying to understand what it means to implement what the solar need in the future will be. I was really impressed to see your overview of the different states and the footprint of land that needs to be converted in order to even address what we will consume in the future. Virginia was listed but it was still very small, and we are already shocked with the solar plants that are going to be implemented here around Charlottesville. So our attempt obviously is, first of all, don't try to take down the green land, but settle on gray land. But if you need to settle on green land, you need to do this in the most multifunctional and multi-beneficial way as possible, including the non-humans that are currently living there. So it's really fantastic to see how you address the different topics. The question that I have is an umbrella question, because what we recognize during our readings and all the discussions with the local developer, Woodridge Solar, who is very collaborative and actually wants to do the right thing, is to understand that all of the green energy transition, except for a couple of exceptions, and I'm happy to see the Raccoon Mountain, for example, as an example, or Orca, they are all tapping into the old mechanisms of the fossil fuel energy. The more, the better. The more profit, the better. The faster the profit, the better. And it is also nested in the existing power structure that the fossil fuel energy era generated globally as well as locally. Whoever owns the land has more power. Whoever has the most capital at the moment has most power. Crashing into the situation that we don't have enough ordinances to actually organize how we can do this in a more just and fair manner on site. Just discussing the lack of solar ordinances, for example. Out of your perspective, I mean, you had showed one slide where you said there's hope for there to be optimistic with a series of global pilot projects. It's exciting to hear. It's also exciting to hear that there is resistance from the indigenous population, specifically in these remote areas. What do you think we can do? And what do you think as consumers, as well as professionals or future professionals out there in the world, to strengthen that this is really becoming a just transition? Because it seems like an overwhelming problem.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for that, Mona. And the way I'll answer it is partially how I was going to answer Maria too. But before I do, let me just ask: do you have Holly Jean Buck's work like involved in any of this stuff? Do you know Holly? So Holly's a sociologist. She does kind of rural energy landscape work. She's based at Buffalo. She's written. She has an MFA and a PhD in sociology, so she's by far the best writer in like the entirety of academia. Like her creative writing is incredible, and also just like is a real treat to read. I think the book that I always think of for her, which is less germane to this, is called After Geoengineering, which is basically a choose your own adventure book, academic book that she wrote, where she takes you through a bunch of different geoengineering scenarios, but it's structured the way you would read a choose your own adventure book. It's incredible. I'm like honestly still shocked today it didn't win like some national book award. But the book she put out most recently that's probably more germane to this question, Mona, is called Beyond Net Zero, or it's called Ending Fossil Fuels Beyond Net Zero. And, you know, she takes as her kind of central premise in that book, a different but related sort of topic, which, you know, she's concerned with how do we manage the decline of the fossil fuel industry? How do we manage it into obsolescence or into non-existence? And, you know, one of her big concerns there is that, you know, we can all, and even fossil fuel companies can see a very near-term end to the use of fossil fuels for most of our power, for most of our electricity, for most of our cars. But they've known that for a long time. And so they've gotten very busy and have remained very busy building up the petrochemical aspect of their industry, right? So single-use plastics and all the other things, like sitting here today, my glasses, my AirPods, my hat, this pen, my shirt, my socks, my shoes, all have petrochemicals in them. And they have made their industry so indispensable to the functioning of society that even if we end fossil fuels as a fuel source, there's not really a plan in place or a sort of horizon in sight for ending petrochemical sort of single-use plastics. Every single product on your house is like, it is coated or made with them. And I think about that like in similar ways to I think your question, Mona, for like, what do we do? Like, what do we do on the consumer side? And I think the answer is like, you can try your best, but the answer is almost always going to be around breaking industrial scale power. Or regulating it. And I say that because, you know, I think there's sometimes a quick reaction in these conversations to just be like, well, like either keep everything in the ground, rare earths, fossil fuels, whatever, and figure it out. That's where degrowthers tend to sort of go. Or like to just assume we have to do this at an industrial scale and it's going to be terrible for a long time. And in 300 years, we'll be glad we did it, which is kind of how eco-modernists feel about this. The reality is like for as long as humans have existed, we've done extraction work. We've been pulling stuff out of the ground and using it for a variety of purposes for as long as we've been able to like make tools and use them. That's distinct from extractivism as like a mode of operating, right? As a political economic arrangement in which the only question that matters there is profit accumulation, to your point, Mona, and is about, you know, identifying reserves of material that, you know, are in the ground, that are worth a lot of money, and that we then can either pull immediately out of the ground, or we need to invest money in our R&D that allows us to build new technology that can do that for us. So this is one reason why some of the former mining sites that I think Maria mentioned are now coming back online, because we've developed new technology that makes it possible for us to recover material that wasn't possible to recover before. Another reason is that, you know, some of those mines, the things they were developed for initially, maybe like fluorspar or cryolite or gold or bauxite or something like that, was exhausted or could have been exhausted. And so they closed the mine down. Or much more likely, there could have been a shift in material use. So one of the big like challenges in the renewable energy sort of industry for manufacturers is something called material substitutability. So for lithium, it's less of a concern. It's the most efficient mineral that we've like ever found for battery storage. But for almost all other aspects of the energy system, like the things we're pulling out of the ground now to make panels and wind turbines and all the other things we need, they may not be the things we use in 10 or 20 years. We might find a new element. We might develop a better way of extracting or using a different element. And so, you know, a country like the US might stockpile what it thinks is a 30-year supply of something like praseodymium to make supermagnets, and then discover 5 years into that, after all of that investment, that actually we can just use like nickel instead for it, and that's abundant and it's no problem. So you know, I think like this question of what's going on with these mining sites is really important, because they close and reopen for a bunch of different reasons. They almost all have to do with like material substitutability or technological innovation. And those things are happening while mining operators are looking to build, you know, mining sites that follow one of two paths now. There used to be like a pretty differentiated landscape of mining. It's now basically two types. It's open pit, mostly automated mining, where you might have a handful of people like the folks you met, Maria, who work there, and they monitor the robots essentially. And then you have also very like labor intensive versions, like I showed you a picture of in the Congo, right? Where there is no technological investment. It's just people inhaling and absorbing cobalt and other pollutants as they pull this stuff out of the ground. And, you know, I could talk forever about all of these points, but I think a couple things just to pull forward from Maria's questions as well. You know, yeah, like there are really good jobs in mining for young people, just not people who live in the communities where the mining is happening, right? So this is always the challenge, is that a mine will be developed and there'll be promises of jobs, and some of those jobs will materialize, but not most of them. And they'll almost exclusively go to people who were trained elsewhere. This has been true for as long as we've had extraction, by the way. So when we developed the Appalachian coal fields, the way that we did it was we imported Black coal workers from Alabama and Georgia, who had been basically excavating coal there, and in parts of Illinois and Iowa as well. And we moved them all to Appalachia. And there's a really wonderful book by Carita Brown called Gone Home, which is about the like third and fourth generations of, you know, Black Appalachians who left after the mines were exhausted and their parents passed away, but still come back every summer, every couple summers, and meet up in these former coal mining sort of social halls to basically trade stories and oral histories about their families being relocated there and then dispersing. So this is a very long story. It's a very long way of saying, like, those jobs, like, yeah, they're great. They're not going to go to anybody who lives in Nevada or Southern California. They're going to go to folks like your students from all over the world. And that's also true in South Greenland, where the mining site I mentioned, you know, they talk about all the jobs created, they talk about all the wealth created. None of those jobs are for Greenlanders, and they've now basically admitted as much in court. This is a thing I didn't mention. You know, Greenland is not sovereign. It's a colony of Denmark, and so it's subject to the Danish court system. And when they denied the mining operators exploitation permit in 2021, they were sued in Danish court unsuccessful. But now, both Denmark and Greenland are being sued in international court to force them to give them an exploitation license, and they'll probably be successful. And that could happen kind of any day now. So yeah, there's a lot more I could say, but I'll stop talking there. I feel like I've been trying to respond to that inefficiently for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is another question from Maria's students. And it says, I'm intrigued by your tenure as a policy advisor in the White House Domestic Policy Council during the Obama administration. Did this experience influence you transition from landscape design towards bringing the climate justice movement demands with the policy development process?
I mean, the short answer is yes. Probably obviously. You know, most of the folks that I get to work with and collaborate with are folks I met through that experience. So I could give you like a very long, like basically family tree of collaborators that all kind of begin somewhere in that world. But, you know, the folks I co-founded Indivisible with were also my roommates and coworkers in the White House. Many of the folks who I collaborate with now on research, so Daniel Donna Cohen, Thea Riofrancos, Julie Klinger, and others are folks I met while I was in that job, either because they were, you know, within government somewhere or doing work that I thought was interesting to the work we were doing, and became kind of colleagues and then collaborators. And also, I think is part of why like this job has been like fun at times for me, because I get to like I get to use an institution with some resources and some power and some credibility to point my field in like different directions than it might otherwise go. Because I mean, you know this, you're in graduate school for architecture. Our field is very small and very insular: architecture and landscape architecture and city planning. And so most everybody knows everybody. Most of our collaborators and friends and colleagues and even partners are in the same industry. And that's lovely for lots of reasons, but it also means it can make some of this kind of collaborative work more difficult than it has to be. And most of my sort of connections in that regard are outside the field, because I spent so much of my professional life outside of it. And it means I probably think about this a little bit differently than some of my colleagues, but I also have access to a bunch of different people and sort of fields of knowledge or bodies of expertise or sites even than folks in my field typically are pointed towards. And yeah, I think it would be impossible for me to pretend like that experience didn't change how I think about all of this stuff, how I get to work on all of this stuff, and how I get to like wind up getting a job like this where I get to play around with a bunch of this stuff. I see Charlotte and Elia on there as well, if I'm saying your name correct. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlotte is raising her hand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Billy, thank you so much. I apologize, I was a bit late, but I am so thrilled to have caught the last hour of your talk. And I was first exposed to you and your work through one of my recent obsessions and fascinations, which is the book written by Matthew Cyber, Atlas of Material Worlds. A fascinating book, and I am actually embarking this year on my master's thesis, which deals with post-extractive, post-mining sites in the Intermountain West, specifically in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I was there a few weeks ago exploring this territory, which is almost entirely covered in abandoned mining claims. So I'm really interested in like rendering visible the kind of latencies of the landscape, the social, ecological, economic histories that, you know, birthed like this region of totally oriented around extraction. And this talk has made me think a lot about the way that the kind of extractive unconscious and like the deterritorializing of extraction operates within this global capitalist system, but also like very specifically within geographies. Like, you know, Maria was talking about these sites in Nevada and Southern California, and I'm wondering if, you know, I'm working specifically in this, you know, beautiful mountain range, right? But has this really, this like unearthed, unspoken history, like, you know, within the strata physically, but also in this like conscious of the place. And I'm wondering if you thought at all about the future, kind of projected futures of these types of abandoned sites, these post-extractive sites, right? No longer used, like they're used for something else potentially, or I don't know. I just wanted to get your kind of thoughts on these like after extraction, you know, this state.
Yeah, no, thanks for this. It's such a great question. And I'm sure Matt talked about his new book probably when he was with you as well. So The Dark Side of Green. Yeah. So I'm also very excited for that one. I'm writing something for him in it, but I'm really excited to see what else is in there. I think there are a few things I'll just point you towards, Charlotte, and obviously we can talk more like after today as well if you want via email or something. One is that there's a federal program that's going to be really important to you if it's not already. It's called the Abandoned Minelands Program, or AML. Yeah. So this is basically the repository for every abandoned mining site that's been cataloged or documented in the U.S. I've just had the numbers in front of me because I wrote a chapter for a book called Technical Lands that's about the AML program. But I don't have them in front of me. It's like 1.5 million acres of AML sites in Appalachia alone, and something like $10 billion in deferred remediation costs. That's not even including any kind of upgrading costs after you remediate the toxic sites. But you know, there's a lot there in the AML program that I think you're going to want to dig into. It deals specifically with all of the abandoned uranium mining sites in the Southwest and the Intermountain West. And then, you know, there are a couple other places I think you'll like enjoy poking around in. One is there's a journal that's now sadly, I think, like done, but called Scenario, that my colleagues Nick Pevsner and Steph Carlisle used to put out. There's a specific issue on extraction, and I think Matt has an essay in there. If not, lots of other landscape folks do. That probably will be like important to what you're thinking about here. And the other thing I would say too is, you know, this is maybe related to, I think, Maria's sort of point earlier about the different ways that, you know, abandoned mining sites get memorialized or interpreted over time. You know, the big pieces of that are like how those things get interpreted and remembered in like public consciousness are often the product of like industry propaganda or state, like, you know, whitewashing essentially, right? And I think about that. I'm thinking about that right now just because, you know, the group that I just took to Greenland for a studio trip, we went through Copenhagen, which is the site of like the Greenlandic diaspora. It's where most Greenlanders who have left and can't or don't want to return are now kind of stuck. And they had a fantastic new exhibition up at the Louisiana Museum that was done by and for and with Greenlanders. And the title of it was A Memory Over History. And it was focused on beginning to document and foreground the oral histories of Greenlanders about the the impact that mining and colonization and other forms of imperial control, sort of whether it's by the military or scientific experimentation, how those have shaped like Greenlanders' lives, their past, their presents, their futures. And that's how I would that's the frame I would encourage you to think about in your own project, is less about like, what's the accepted history that's been written about this by the mining operator, by the state of Nevada, by whoever, and what are the actual stories about what this place meant and still means to people, that you want to foreground and build your project around.
Totally. Thank you so much. No, that's amazing. I spent 2 days at the archives in this small little town. They have over 10,000 documents about mining, and not one of these documents that I could find in their database talks about the seizure of land and displacement of indigenous people, right? Like there are these narratives that are perpetuated and those that are obscured. Anyways, thank you so much. I would love to, I'll email you.
Okay, yeah, the last thing I'll say on that is just, and I know there are other questions, it's just, just because you mentioned archive, I often think about mining sites, these deposits themselves as archives. And I think about Greenland as an archive, right? Like the ice sheet that's at the edge of town where the mine sits is 250,000 years old. That's what the ice age is right there. And it's literally, we drill cores in it because it tells us, important information about past climatic and geologic and biologic sort of events. The same is true for the rocks. I don't know how old the ones in Eater Mountain West are, but the ones in South Greenland are like 3 billion years old. And there are very deep, thick, compressed histories of like human and non-human and like biotic and non-biotic like relationships in those rocks in the earth. Those are things we pull out of the ground, some of them intentionally like coal, and some of them unintentionally like thorium, which is a byproduct that comes with much of this stuff. And once they're out, that's it. The archive is gone, and the consequences are what we get to deal with. So for coal, it's CO2 in the atmosphere. For thorium, it's 15 million years or so of radioactive half-life.
I think Ilya had raised his hand, but there is another question from Ahmed that I will read. It says, hi.
I'm gonna jump in because students need to go through 2 theses now at once. So if you don't mind, then has Ilya to share, and then maybe we should wrap up gently. Also, considering Billy's time. Sorry that I interjected, but
it's fine.
No, it's cool. I'm having so much fun. I lost track of time. So yeah, I do need to run very shortly.
Hello, Billy. Thanks for the presentation. It was quite insightful for me, and I believe for my colleagues also. In our trip to Nevada, we're kind of looking at abandoned mines, like different mines, and so we're kind of trying to see how we could situate a project, like an intervention around those mines, and then what it means, okay, so what happens after mining, right, like those mining endeavors. And in your book, The Blueprint for Coastal Adaptation, you address all those challenges associated with post-mining activities, and I was quite fascinated by that. And so I was wondering if you could expand more on those pivotal factors. So what are the factors that you feel are the main factors impeding, I guess, the remediation of contaminated sites? And then additionally, you mentioned how some of the remediations include the building of facilities such as prisons. So I was wondering if there are certain interventions that you deem fit, like recommendations that you have for interventions on this post-mining site, I guess.
Yeah, these are great questions. I'm going to try to go fast, but again, if you want to follow up with me via email, please do.
Okay.
So maybe to go a little bit backwards, the question of what you do with some of the mining sites, let's just say in Appalachia, right? These are mountaintop removal sites that now have prisons built on top of them, which is a horrible thing, but also creates some interesting post decarceration and post carbon future opportunities. One of those is that every prison built in the US after 1989 or so has to be on a microgrid. So it has to be able to withstand a regional blackout and keep the lights on and keep the facility going. So they're operating on the kind of grid we say we want for a renewable energy system in many places, which basically means if we decarcerate and shut down the prison, based on the average size in Appalachia, we can power a town of about 3,000 people today with their existing generation resources. but they also happen to be the best sites in Appalachia for building anything, including new renewable energy generation and storage, because they're flat and they're on the top of mountains. And often they're very well reinforced because they're former mountaintop removal sites. And so, you know, I've had students in studio basically work with a group of prison abolitionists and fossil fuel supply side, you know, activists to think through how you might decommission a prison, how you might transform it into a rural electric co-op, and how you might build enough new renewable energy generation and storage and transmission capacity with a bunch of jobs for those now decarcerated folks to basically power Appalachia completely on renewable energy or primarily on renewable energy by 2050. And those are like the kinds of things I think, you know, there are lots of technical and political and financial constraints too. But look, you're in an academic design studio. Everything you do is speculative anyway. And I wouldn't let those things that make it hard to build the project tomorrow keep you like from imagining what it should be 50 years from now. That's the point of a studio like this, is to push all of us to think beyond like what we might be able to do tomorrow and what we should do, you know, the day after it. And you had another question in there, but I've completely lost it, Ilya. I think it was about cleanup, right? You're muted, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess what's like the major factors mitigating cleanups of contaminated sites and old mines? So is it like government policies, or is it that the cost of cleanups, or I don't know, or is it a technical challenge? I'm just kind of curious as to what are like the major factors. I know on one side there hasn't been much awareness, you know, but then on the other side, I feel like there may be some other factors that even if the government wants to do it, I guess it's a bit challenging, right?
Yeah, I'm pulling up something here from a lecture I just had in studio the other day, just to show you, because it's, I think, going to help answer part of this question. 1 sec, let me do this. Okay, can you see this weird little flowchart thing? Yeah, so what you're looking at here is the corporate structure of one of the absentee landowners of a coal operation in Appalachia in the kind of mid to late 20th century. And I'm pulling that, this is from a book from John Gaventa called Power and Powerlessness. It's about kind of the story of Appalachia's kind of colonization and development and extraction activities. But it's in here, he pulls it forward because what he's really writing about is kind of an answer to this question. He's saying, like, how is it that all of these abandoned mine sites can be so toxic and so unaddressed and so otherwise like pervasive in the region? And one is that because all of these companies are structured in a way that allows them to essentially close the shell corporation they created to own the mining site, to go through bankruptcy and decommission it and put the land into receivership and make the state or the federal government responsible for its cleanup. They're supposed to be paying money into a trust fund that covers the cost of remediation. That amount was always set too low to actually cover the cost of remediation, and most of the operators have found ways, loopholes, to get out of paying into it altogether. So you have this, you know, corporate structure in place that allows them to basically walk away from a mine the moment it's no longer productive. And you have a sort of regulatory environment that allows them to give the land over in receivership to the state or local government and make them responsible for its cleanup. And so that's a big part of it, is that it's not like a design problem per se, but obviously it's a policy problem that has profound like impacts on design and planning work in where you're operating. Give me 1 second. I have a student like knocking on my door. So let me go tell them I'll be just a second and come right back.
Okay, you're going to wrap this up in a second as soon as he's back. Okay. Thank you, Billy. We wanted to, express our real gratitude. This was a fantastic keynote that really wrapped up and connected the dots on many of the topics that we discussed during our virtual symposium. We would love to thank you with a big applause. I know there were multiple chats, multiple participants who posted it in the chat. Thank you. And at some point, we really love to have you back. This is an ongoing discussion, and we will continue working on these topics.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for putting this together. I know like any kind of symposium related to a class is like a big challenge, a multi-institutional one, like a million times so. And I'm just really grateful for the work you're doing, and whatever like opportunities there are to do stuff together after this, you just let me know.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Billy.
All right.
Thank you
Bye-bye
so
all.
much, Billy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.